The emergency broadcast filled every council chamber across 300 star systems simultaneously. The Marani were dying, and they wanted everyone to know about it. Their message played on loop, translated into 47 languages, showing images of gray fungal blooms spreading across one-screen farmlands. Children stared at cameras with hollow eyes. Adults coughed into cloth masks that did nothing to stop the spores filling their lungs. 4 billion voices asking the same question: is anyone out there who cares? Ambassador Roth of the Hirsch Empire watched the transmission with compound eyes that saw in spectrums humans could barely imagine. His exoskeleton clicked as he turned to the assembled representatives. The council chamber on Threshold 7 station existed in carefully controlled atmosphere, accommodating 12 different species who breathed everything from methane to chlorine gas. Roth's voice buzzed through the translator network. A predictable outcome for species 7794. The Marani invested poorly in atmospheric monitoring systems. Their agricultural methods depleted soil microbiomes. This fungal outbreak is the natural consequence of inadequate planetary management. The holographic display showed Myra's continents turning from green to sickly gray-brown. Projections indicated total ecological collapse within 4 months. The Marani had maybe 6 months before starvation claimed the last of them. Roth presented these facts without emotion, as one might describe weather patterns. Ambassador Vera of the Talvan Collective shimmered in her containment field, her crystalline form refracting light into rainbow patterns. Her voice resonated like wind chimes. The Council database contains 3,000 years of Marani cultural archives. We propose immediate documentation protocols. Their music traditions are particularly unique. We should preserve recordings before the final population centers fall. David Cole sat in the human delegation seat, still unfamiliar with the smooth material that adapted to his body temperature. Earth had joined the Galactic Council only 40 years ago, barely a blink in cosmic time. He was the third human to hold the ambassador position. The first 2 had quit in frustration. Now he understood why. "You want to record them dying?" David kept his voice level, though his hands gripped the armrests. "Document their extinction like it's a nature." Programmed. Vera's crystalline structure pulsed with what might have been confusion. "Ambassador Cole, the Marani civilization will end regardless of our actions. We can at least ensure their cultural contributions survive in the archives. Future species can learn from their mistakes." "Their mistakes?" David looked around the chamber at faces that ranged from insectoid to aquatic to geometric patterns of light. "They're farmers. They grew food. A fungus they didn't create and can't control is killing them. That's not a mistake, that's a catastrophe." Ambassador Drell of the Draylan Federation spoke next, his voice bubbling through his water-filled environment pod. The aquatic being's tentacles gestured in patterns that the translator rendered as words. "The Council operates on resource allocation protocols established over millennia. We have analyzed the Marani situation. Atmospheric remediation would require 700,000 units. Fungal genome sequencing and counteragent development would need another 2 million units minimum. Evacuation of the population exceeds our current transport capacity by a factor of 12. Drell's tentacles created a holographic chart showing numbers that David was still learning to interpret. The probability of successful intervention is estimated at 37%. The resource investment cannot be justified when measured against other council priorities. We propose limited evacuation of genetic samples and cultural artifacts. Approximately 2,000 Marani specimens could be preserved for potential future cloning programs. David felt his stomach turn. "Specimens? You're talking about people, 4 billion people." "Ambassador Cole," Roth's compound eyes focused on the human. "You represent a young species, only 4 centuries since your industrial revolution. Your emotional response is understandable but impractical. The galaxy contains trillions of beings across thousands of worlds. Resources are finite. The Council must prioritize sustainable civilizations over those that have demonstrated fatal flaws in planetary management." The holographic display shifted to show Council statistics, graphs and charts that tracked species rise and fall like stock market indexes. David saw the numbers. 743 civilizations had gone extinct in the past 1,000 years alone. The Council had documented each one, preserved their art and music and literature, let them die anyway. How many could have been saved? David asked quietly. The chamber fell silent. The question violated some unspoken protocol. Roth's exoskeleton clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation. Irrelevant speculation, Ambassador. The Council operates on established principles. Intervention in terminal civilizations disrupts natural selection processes. Species that cannot adapt should not be artificially sustained. David stood up, breaking another protocol. Human bodies still look strange to most Council species, awkwardly proportioned and inefficiently designed. He had stopped caring what they thought months ago. The Morani sent that distress call to every inhabited system in this sector. They're begging for help, and you're all sitting here debating how to best catalog their corpses. He looked at each representative in turn. Earth will respond to their call. We're mounting a relief mission immediately. The chamber erupted in overlapping voices, translators struggling to keep up. Roth's buzzing cut through the noise. Ambassador Cole, such action would be unprecedented. The resource expenditure alone would cripple your economy for decades. Earth lacks the technology for effective atmospheric remediation. This is emotional grandstanding, nothing more. We'll figure it out. David gathered his data tablets. Humanity has a saying, we didn't come this far just to come this far. The Morani asked for help. We're going to help them. Vera's crystalline form pulsed rapidly. Your species will bankrupt itself for strangers. This violates basic economic logic. Maybe, David headed toward the exit. But we'll be able to look at ourselves in the mirror. Can you say the same? He left the Council chamber behind, their voices rising in debate about human irrationality and emotional decision-making. Let them debate. Earth's fleets were already mobilizing. The message had gone out within hours of receiving the Morani distress call. Every nation on Earth contributing ships, supplies, personnel. The Council had forgotten something important. Humanity remembered what it felt like to be alone in the dark, crying out for help that never came. They remembered plagues and famines and disasters that killed millions. They remembered when one nation's tragedy became everyone's emergency. The Morani were 4 billion strangers on a world 63 light-years away. But they were neighbors in the only way that mattered. They needed help. Humanity was already on its way. 3 weeks changed everything. The shipyards above Earth orbit had never seen activity like this. Construction crews worked triple shifts, welding new medical bays onto colony transports. Engineers ripped out cargo holds to install atmospheric processing units. Every vessel that could make the journey was being converted, repurposed, transformed into something between a hospital and a lifeline. Dr. Amy Walsh floated in zero gravity, reviewing fungal genome sequences on her tablet while technicians installed microscopy equipment around her. The converted freight hauler Mercy had been carrying mining equipment to Titan last month. Now it carried 200 scientists and enough laboratory equipment to analyze an entire ecosystem. She bumped against a crate marked biohazard containment and pushed herself toward the observation window. The fleet stretched across her view like a river of lights. 43 ships so far, with more arriving daily. Not warships or exploration vessels. These were colony transports, medical frigates, agricultural seed ships, even 3 deep space mining platforms someone had figured out how to retrofit with life support. The largest volunteer mobilization in human history, and they were still 2 weeks from departure. Amy's tablet chimed. Another message from her daughter begging her not to go. She had not replied to the last 5. How could she explain that this was exactly why she had to go? Her daughter was safe on Earth. Somewhere on Myra, billions of daughters were watching their parents die. Someone had to try. Down in the engine section of Mercy, Captain Robert Lee supervised the installation of enhanced slip-space drives. His military background showed in the way he organized work crews, turning chaos into efficiency. 28 years in the Space Force, most of it running logistics for Mars colony supply lines. He had retired last year, planning to spend time with grandchildren he barely knew. The Marani distress call changed those plans. Within 48 hours, he was back in uniform, volunteered to command a civilian relief vessel. Most of his crew were civilians too, farmers who understood soil chemistry, doctors who had fought epidemics in Lagos and Mumbai and Sao Paulo, engineers who built water purification systems for refugee camps. They knew what disaster looked like. They knew how to help. "Captain, we've got a problem with the atmospheric filters." The young engineer looked worried. "They're designed for human tolerances. We don't know what the Marani breathe." Robert pulled up the biological data they had on the Marani. Not much. The species kept to themselves mostly, trading agricultural products for basic technology. Four-armed herbivores, tall and slender, skin that changed colors based on emotion. Their atmosphere was oxygen-rich like Earth's, but with different trace elements. "Make the filters adjustable. We'll calibrate when we get there. Right now I just need them functional." He clapped the engineer on the shoulder. "We're going to figure this out as we go. That's what humans do best." 3 decks above, Nurse Pete Ockhaffer unpacked medical supplies in what used to be a cargo bay. The space was bigger than most Earth hospitals. They had filled it with modular medical pods, each one capable of supporting a different biochemistry. Alien physiology was mostly guesswork. The Council shared some basic data, but Marani anatomy was only partially documented. Pete had survived 3 Ebola outbreaks in Nigeria before joining the WHO's space medicine program. He understood triage. He understood that you save who you can with what you have. He also understood that most of his patients were going to die. The fungal plague had been spreading for 9 months. By the time they arrived, millions would already be gone. But millions more might still be saved. That was enough to try. The communications station buzzed constantly with incoming messages. Volunteers applying for crew positions, offers of supplies and equipment, donations from every nation on Earth. The cost was astronomical. Economists predicted decades of debt. Financial analysts called it collective insanity. Nobody cared. The fundraising drives exceeded targets within hours. Retired doctors canceled retirement. Agricultural students postponed degrees. A billionaire donated 3 entire cargo vessels. A 12-year-old in Tokyo donated her birthday money. When disaster called, humanity answered with everything it had. On Threshold 7 station, the Galactic Council monitored the human fleet with something between curiosity and concern. Ambassador Roth filed daily reports about the irrational resource allocation. Vera documented the unusual social cohesion patterns. Drell ran probability. Calculations that kept getting more confused. "They're stripping their own colony ships," Drell reported to the Council. "Earth's expansion into the outer solar system will be delayed by decades. The economic impact exceeds their entire planetary GDP for the next fiscal cycle." Roth's compound eyes focused on the holographic fleet display. "They cannot succeed. The Marani ecosystem collapse is too advanced. Human technology is insufficient for atmospheric remediation at this scale. They will waste enormous resources and achieve nothing." But the human fleet kept growing. By departure day, 67 vessels filled Earth orbit. Not a military fleet, a rescue fleet. Scientists and doctors and engineers and farmers, people who had never left their home planet volunteering to cross 63 light years to help strangers. The departure ceremony was broadcast across Earth. No speeches, no grand declarations, just a simple message transmitted toward Myra at light speed. "We received your call, we're coming, hold on." Slipspace drives engaged simultaneously, tearing holes in reality. 67 ships vanished from Earth orbit, beginning a 6-week journey at velocities that bent physics. Inside those ships, thousands of humans prepared for the hardest challenge of their lives. They studied Marani language files, reviewed medical data, ran simulations of fungal remediation strategies. Amy Walsh recorded a message for her daughter, knowing it would arrive long after she reached Myra. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too, but someone has to help. The galaxy is big and cold, and most species have forgotten what it means to care about strangers. We can't forget. The moment we stop caring is the moment we stop being human. Robert Lee walked through Mercy's corridors, checking on crew morale. He found them singing work songs while calibrating equipment, laughing while running disaster scenarios. Hope was contagious, so was determination. Pete Ockhaffer stood in the medical bay, looking at the empty pods waiting for patients. 4 billion Marani needed help. His team could maybe save a few thousand directly, but those thousands would have families, communities. The ripples spread wider than any individual life. The fleet raced through slip space while on Myra the gray fungus spread. Time was the enemy now. Every hour mattered. Every life hung in balance. The galaxy watched and waited to see if human compassion could achieve what galactic wisdom said was impossible. Myra's atmosphere burned during entry. The converted colony ship Mercy shook violently as heat shields glowed orange-red. Through the viewport, Pete Ockhaffer watched the planet's surface approach. What should have been green continents looked like bruised flesh, gray and purple fungal blooms spreading across the landscape like infection. The landing zone was a cleared agricultural field outside the capital city. Marani ground crews had marked it with chemical lights, but half the lights were dark. Not enough power left in their failing grid. Not enough people left to maintain basic services. The city beyond looked half-dead already, buildings dark, streets empty. Mercy's landing struts touched down with a shudder that rattled every bolt. Before the dust settled, cargo ramps were dropping. Pete led his medical team out into alien air, breathing through filters that tasted like metal and fear. The Marani atmosphere was wrong somehow, too thick, too warm, heavy with spores that made the sunlight hazy. They had arrived at dawn. Local time meant nothing when you were saving lives. The first Marani he saw was a child. She stood at the edge of the landing field, all 4 arms wrapped around herself, iridescent skin faded to pale gray. She could not have been more than 6 years old in human terms. Her parents probably sent her to watch the aliens land, to witness the impossible sight of help arriving. Pete knelt down slowly, making himself smaller, less threatening. He pulled off his helmet despite protocols screaming at him to keep it on. The spore count here would kill a human in weeks. He smiled at the child and spoke through his translator. "Hi there, my name is Pete. We're here to help." The Marani child stared at him with eyes too large for her face. Then she started crying and Pete understood. She had given up hope. They all had. The distress call was a formality, a message in a bottle thrown into an endless ocean. Nobody actually expected rescue. Medical teams spread across the city like floodwater. Pete's group set up triage centers in whatever buildings still had power. The sick came in waves, carried by family members too weak to walk themselves. Marani physiology was different enough that standard medical scanners barely worked. Blood chemistry was incompatible with human medications. They were improvising everything, making educated guesses with lives in the balance. The Marani were tall, slender beings with 4 arms and skin that shifted colors with emotion. Right now all Pete saw was fear gray and sickness purple. Their internal anatomy was a nightmare of differences. 4-chambered hearts that beat at irregular rhythms. Respiratory systems that processed oxygen through gill-like structures along their ribs. Digestive systems that required specific bacterial colonies the fungal plague was destroying. Pete's team lost the first dozen patients. Medications were wrong, dosages killed instead of cured. Ventilators damaged delicate gill tissue. It was chaos and desperation, and people dying on tables because human medicine was not designed for alien bodies. But they learned fast. By the second day they were saving more than they lost, improvising treatments that worked even when they should not have. A cardiac medication designed for humans somehow stabilized Marani heart rhythms. Antifungal creams meant for athletes' foot slowed the spores on gill tissue. Small victories in an ocean of tragedy. Across the planet, Amy Walsh's science teams collected samples from the spreading fungal zones. The plague was unlike anything in Earth's databases. The genome was massive, complex, almost deliberately designed. Amy spent 72 hours without sleep running analysis after analysis. On the third night she found it. The fungus was not natural. Someone had engineered it centuries ago as a bioweapon. Some ancient war between forgotten enemies had created this horror and then lost control of it. The weapon had waited dormant in Marani soil until atmospheric changes triggered its activation. "It's a targeted killer," Amy explained to Robert Lee over a static-filled comm channel. "Designed to destroy agricultural systems and nothing else. But it evolved. 300 years of evolution, and now it attacks Marani biology directly. The spores bind to their respiratory proteins." Robert stood in what used to be a farming village. Every field was dead gray fungus. The agricultural teams were trying to save seed banks, rescue genetic material from crop species that had fed this world for thousands of years. They had saved maybe 5%. The rest was gone forever. "Can we stop it?" Robert asked, though he already knew the answer would hurt. "There's a vulnerability in the spore reproduction cycle. Specific UV wavelengths disrupt it." "Completely, but Myra's sun doesn't produce that frequency naturally." Amy's voice cracked with exhaustion. "We need to change the sunlight itself." The engineering solution was insane. Build an orbital mirror array to redirect and filter Myra's sunlight. Amplify the UV frequencies that would kill the spores. Essentially give an entire planet specialized light therapy from space. The cost was catastrophic. 20 human ships would need to be dismantled. Their hull panels and solar collectors and sensor arrays cannibalized to build the mirror network. 20 ships that were the only way home for 8,000 human volunteers. Sacrifice them to save a world, or keep them and watch billions die. Robert called for a vote among the fleet captains. The decision was unanimous before he finished explaining the plan. They had not come to Myra to fail. They had not traveled 63 light years to watch from orbit. If the ships needed to die so the Marani could live, then the ships would die. Grace Nolan led the orbital construction teams. Zero-gravity welding and hostile radiation while racing against time. They had 6 weeks to complete the array before spore concentrations became fatal even to humans in protective gear. 6 weeks to save a world. On the surface, Pete worked 18-hour shifts in the medical centers. The Marani child he had first met, her name was Lyra, became his shadow. She helped carry supplies, comforted patients, learned basic first aid. Her parents were both dead. The fungal plague had taken them months ago. She had been living alone, surviving on stored food and hope. Pete promised her that hope was not wasted. Humans kept their promises. The galaxy watched from observation posts, expecting failure. But the humans kept working, kept saving lives, kept building impossible solutions to unsolvable problems. They sang while they worked, shared food with starving Marani families, taught alien children human games to distract them from the horror. And slowly, impossibly, things began to change. Grace Nolan floated in vacuum, watching her ship die. The colony transport Hope had been her home for 9 years, carrying supplies between Earth and Mars, back when Mars colonies were humanity's greatest adventure. Now she was cutting it apart with plasma torches, harvesting its bones to build salvation. The work was delicate and brutal. Hull panels 20 meters across had to be removed. Without warping the metal, solar collector arrays needed careful disconnection from power systems still running. Every piece mattered. Every calculation had to be perfect. Build the mirrors wrong and the UV frequency would be off. Off by even a fraction meant failure. Failure meant 4 billion dead. Her construction crews worked around the clock. Engineers from 12 different nations coordinating in 3 languages plus hand signals. They had become family in the past weeks, bonded by shared purpose and the knowledge they were building something impossible. "Grace, we've got a problem with panel 7. The voice crackled through her helmet comm. "The reflective coating is degrading faster than projected. Radiation exposure is too high this close to the star." Grace pushed off from Hope's dying hull, firing maneuvering thrusters to reach the problem section. The massive mirror panel hung in space like a fragment of broken sky. The coating was indeed degrading, oxidizing in the stellar radiation. At this rate, it would fail before the array was complete. She ran calculations in her head, the kind of mental math that separated good engineers from dead ones in space. They could reinforce the coating, but that required materials they did not have. Could strip panels from another ship, but that would delay construction by weeks. Time they absolutely did not have. We double-layer the panels, Grace decided. Cut the surface area in half, stack 2 panels instead of 1. The combined coating will hold. That means we need twice as many ships. Her second engineer understood immediately. We were already at 20 ships. This doubles it to 40. 40 ships dismantled. 16,000 crew members stranded planetside indefinitely. Grace looked down at Myra's gray-green surface, looked at the dying world that needed them, made the same decision she had been making since this mission started. Then we use 40 ships, send out the call. The response was immediate. 20 more ships volunteered their hulls within an hour. Captains who had been planning to stay in orbit now committed to years marooned on an alien world. Crews who thought they had sacrificed enough finding new depths of sacrifice. Down on Myra, Pete held a Marani infant while its mother coughed blood into a recycled oxygen mask. The baby was tiny, fragile, 4 little arms gripping his fingers with desperate strength. Marani infants were born premature compared to human babies, needed months of intensive care to survive. This one had been born into a plague zone with failing medical infrastructure. The mother's name was Sela. She had walked 19 kilometers carrying her baby, looking for help that every rational calculation said would not exist. Found instead a human medical center that should not exist, run by aliens who had no logical reason to care. Pete ran an IV line into her primary arm while coaching her through breathing exercises. The antifungal treatment was working, slowly clearing the spores from her gilled tissue. She would survive. Her baby would survive. Small miracles built from improvisation and desperation. "Why?" Sela whispered through the translator. Her skin flickered between fever orange and confusion yellow. "Why come here? Why sacrifice so much for strangers?" Pete looked at the baby in his arms, looked at the rows of medical pods filled with recovering Marani, looked at his exhausted team saving lives with medicine and hope and stubborn human refusal to accept the impossible. "Because you asked for help," he said simply, "and we heard you." In orbit, the mirror array was taking shape. 40 ships transformed into geometric patterns of reflective panels, each one precisely angled to redirect Myra's sunlight. The engineering was beyond anything humans had attempted before. They were building a planetary-scale medical device in hostile space with salvaged materials and determination. Grace supervised the final panel installation personally. She had been in vacuum for 16 hours straight, her suit's oxygen reserves running low. Just one more connection, one more calibration, then they could test the system. The last bolt locked into place. The array was complete. "All teams clear the focus zone," Grace commanded, activating mirrors in 30 seconds. Myra turned below them, gray and dying. The mirrors began to move, servos humming through the silence of space. Panels adjusted with precision measured in thousandths of degrees. Sunlight caught on reflective surfaces and bent, filtered, concentrated. The planet's surface began to glow with new light. Not the familiar yellow of Myra's sun, but something different. Ultraviolet frequencies made visible, bathing continents in pale blue radiance. Amy Walsh's team monitored spore die-off rates from surface stations. Numbers scrolled across screens. Initial projections were too conservative. The UV frequency was not just stopping spore reproduction, it was killing the fungus directly. "It's working," Amy breathed into her comm. "Dear God, it's actually working." Across Myra, the gray fungal blooms began to shrivel. Spores died by the trillions. The plague that had been spreading for 9 months started to retreat in hours, not fast enough to save everyone. Millions had already died, but billions might still live. Robert Lee stood in the agricultural center watching the first clean soil samples come through analysis. Marani farmers wept openly, holding dirt that no longer meant death. Human agronomists worked with them, already planning the recovery, planting resistant crop strains, rebuilding the ecosystem from salvaged genetic material. In the Galactic Council chambers, Ambassador Roth watched the mirror array activate, watched the spore counts dropping, watched the impossible become real. His compound eyes processed data that violated every economic model the Council had ever created. They destroyed 40 ships, Roth said to the empty observation room. 40 ships for a species they met 6 weeks ago. Vera's crystalline form materialized beside him. I cannot explain this behavior in rational terms. The resource expenditure exceeds any possible return on investment. Drell's aquatic form pulsed with confusion in his tank. Unless the investment itself is the point, unless they measure success differently than we do. On Myra, Lyra the Marani child sat with Pete on the roof of the medical center, watching the blue light paint the sky. She had learned enough human words to ask the question that mattered. You stay. Pete looked at the stars where 40 ships used to be, looked at the city below where life was beginning again. 8,000 humans were now permanent residents of Myra, whether they planned to be or not. No way home until rescue ships arrived in years. Yeah, Pete said, putting his arm around her small shoulders. We stay. The seasons changed on Myra. 6 months after the mirror array activated, the planet's sky ran clear blue for the first time in a year. Fields that had been gray death now showed green shoots pushing through rehabilitated soil. The fungal plague was not gone completely, but it was contained, manageable, no longer an extinction event. Pete adopted Lyra officially in a ceremony that combined human and Marani traditions. 3 other Marani children joined his household over the following weeks, orphans who needed family and a human nurse who had more love than sense. His small apartment became chaos, filled with 4-armed children learning to speak 2 languages simultaneously, human and Marani kids playing games that required translation and patience and laughter. Learning Marani was harder than any language Pete had studied. The color-shifting skin added emotional context to every word. Formal speech required specific arm gestures. Informal conversation included scent markers his human nose barely detected. But Lyra taught him patiently, correcting his pronunciation with giggles that sounded like wind chimes. He was Marani now by choice and by bond. Earth was 63 light-years away, impossibly distant. Myra was home. These children were his children. This community was his community. Amy Walsh's wedding was attended by 200 humans and 3,000 Marani. She married a Marani agricultural scientist named Vera, whose research into cross-species crop engineering was revolutionizing both their worlds. The ceremony happened in a newly planted field, earth wheat growing alongside Marani grain, 2 ecosystems learning to coexist. I never thought I would marry an alien, Amy admitted during the reception. Never thought I would live on another world, but nothing about this mission went according to plan. Vera's skin shifted through rainbow colors, broadcasting joy so intense it needed no translation. The old plans were too small. We build bigger ones now, together. Their research was already producing results. Hybrid crops that resisted both Earth and Marani diseases. Agricultural techniques that combined millennia of farming wisdom from 2 worlds. Food production on Myra was recovering faster than projections. Soon they would have surplus, enough to feed themselves and trade with neighbors. Robert Lee found his purpose training Marani defense forces. Not for war, nothing in Marani culture prepared them for large-scale violence. But disaster response, emergency coordination, the logistics of saving lives when time mattered. He taught them what humans had learned through centuries of mistakes. Your people move too slowly during crises, Robert explained to his Marani students. You discuss, debate, seek consensus. Sometimes there is no time for consensus. Someone must decide and Act. The Marani struggled with this concept. Their culture valued collective decision-making, careful consideration, harmony over efficiency. But they had also nearly gone extinct waiting for perfect solutions. Robert taught them to balance wisdom with urgency, to trust leaders during emergencies while maintaining democratic values during peace. Grace Nolan designed the first permanent human settlement using salvaged ship components. The structures were bizarre hybrids, human engineering adapted to Marani aesthetics. Solar panels shaped like flower petals, life support systems that doubled as art installations, buildings that breathed with the planet's atmosphere instead of fighting it. 8,000 humans scattered across Myra found their places. Doctors in hospitals, farmers in fields, engineers rebuilding infrastructure, teachers in schools where human and Marani children learned together. They were not colonists. Colonists took over. These humans integrated, became part of existing society, contributed without dominating. The cultural exchange flowed both directions. Marani philosophy emphasized patience, long-term thinking, harmony with natural cycles. Humans brought urgency, adaptability, the controlled chaos of improvisation. Together, they created something neither species had possessed alone. Marani children learned human songs. Human children learned Marani color speech. Mixed families became common, adoption crossing species lines. Pete's household was unusual only in size, not in concept. Love did not require matching DNA. News of Myra's recovery spread through council space. Ambassador Roth filed reports that grew increasingly confused. The economic models said the Marani should be extinct. Human civilization should be bankrupt from the resource expenditure. Instead, both species were thriving. The humans are not leaving, Roth reported to the council. They have established permanent settlements, formed family bonds with the Marani. They are not treating this as a rescue mission anymore. They act as if Myra is their home. Vera studied the data with her crystalline mind. The cultural exchange rate exceeds anything in council history. Humans are learning Marani agricultural techniques. Marani are adopting human emergency response protocols. Both species are transforming. Drell watched the economic indicators with his aquatic intelligence. Myra's recovery rate is 40%. Faster than our models predicted. The human presence is not draining their resources, it is amplifying them. David Cole addressed the Galactic Council with a Marani delegation standing beside him. The Marani ambassador was Vera's sister, chosen specifically because she understood humans. Her skin shifted through diplomatic patterns while she spoke. The humans saved our world when you told us we were doomed. They sacrificed 40 ships, stranded 8,000 of their people, spent resources that will impact their economy for generations. They asked for nothing in return except the chance to help. Her skin flashed with colors that meant gratitude deeper than words. We propose formal alliance. The Marani and humans will face the galaxy as partners. The council chamber erupted in debate. Formal alliance between species was rare, requiring extensive review. But 3 smaller council species immediately requested similar partnerships with humanity. They had their own crises brewing, their own impossible problems. We need help with our water reclamation systems, the Frel representative pleaded. Our projections show failure within 2 years. The council says intervention is not economically justified. Our star is entering unstable phase, the NORAM delegate explained. We have 30 years to evacuate our homeworld. The council offered to preserve our genetic samples. David listened to species after species describing problems the council had deemed unsolvable. Listened to them begging for the same thing the Marani had received, someone who cared enough to try. Earth will evaluate each request, David promised. We cannot save everyone. We are not miracle workers, but we will help where we can. The old council order was fracturing. For 10,000 years, they had operated on cold logic and resource calculations. Now a young species was rewriting the rules with compassion and sacrifice. The galaxy would never be the same. 5 years after the Marani rescue, the galaxy looked different. Not physically, stars still burned in their ancient patterns, but the space between them had changed. Help traveled those distances now, carried by ships from dozens of species who had learned a simple truth: compassion was contagious. The Galactic Assistance Coalition held its annual meeting on Myra. 28 member species gathered in the city that had once been a plague zone. Now it was thriving, a hybrid culture where human skyscrapers stood alongside Marani agricultural towers, where children of 6 different species played in parks growing both earth and alien flowers. Ambassador David Cole walked through the market district with Vera, the Marani diplomat who had become his closest friend. The market was chaos and beauty, vendors selling everything from earth coffee to Marani spices to frail crystalline art. Translator devices buzzed constantly, rendering dozens of languages into comprehensible noise. The Hirsch Empire is threatening sanctions again, Vera mentioned, her skin flickering diplomatic orange. Roth claims we are destabilizing galactic order. David bought some kind of alien fruit from a Marani vendor, bit into it without asking what it was. 5 years on Myra had taught him to trust first and question later. The fruit tasted like strawberries mixed with lightning. Delicious. Let them threaten. Half their member worlds are secretly requesting our help anyway. David watched a human child and Marani child arguing over a toy in that universal language of childhood that needed no translation. Roth is scared. The old order is dying and he knows it. The Galactic Council had fractured along philosophical lines. Traditional species like the Hirsch, Talvon, and Old Guard Draylen formed the Efficiency Alliance, clinging to their resource calculation protocols. They still debated cost-benefit analysis while worlds died. Still believed survival of the fittest meant letting the weak perish. But younger species and reform-minded factions created the GAC. The coalition operated on different principles. Help first, calculate costs later. Share knowledge freely instead of hoarding it. Measure success by lives saved instead of resources preserved. The numbers spoke for themselves. In 5 years, the GAC had intervened in 43 crises. 17 civilizations were saved that would have gone extinct under old council protocols. The frail water crisis was solved with Marani agricultural technology and human engineering. The Noram evacuation succeeded using ships from 9 different species. The Prill plague was contained using methods developed during the Marani rescue. Every success made the old order look worse. Pete stood in Myra's largest medical academy, teaching interspecies emergency medicine to students from 12 different worlds. His Marani children, now teenagers, sat in the front row. Lyra was studying to be a doctor. The others were pursuing engineering, agriculture, diplomacy. They were the first generation who did not remember life before humans arrived. The key to alien physiology is accepting you will be wrong, Pete explained to his class. Human medicine does not work on most species, but the principles work everywhere. Stop bleeding, ensure oxygenation, treat shock, prevent infection. The details change, but the fundamentals remain. A Draylen student raised a tentacle. But Professor, the old protocols say we should not intervene with species we do not fully understand. Too much risk of causing harm. Pete smiled. The old protocols would have let 4 billion Marani die rather than risk making mistakes. We made plenty of mistakes. Lost patients we should have saved. But we saved millions we had no right to save according to traditional calculations. Sometimes you help because it is right, not because it is safe. Grace Nolan's engineering firm had contracts across 20 systems now. Her specialty was adaptive technology, taking designs from one species and making them work for another. She had offices on Myra, Earth, and 3 other worlds. Her human Marani design teams were building the GAC's first dedicated hospital ships. The ships were beautiful, incorporating the best of multiple species engineering traditions. Human adaptability, Marani biological integration, Draylen fluid dynamics, Frel crystalline computing. Each vessel was a testament to cooperation, proof that different minds working together achieved more than any single species alone. Amy Walsh stood in a restored field watching hybrid crops sway in alien wind. Her research had transformed agriculture on 6 worlds. Techniques developed on Myra were feeding billions. She held Vera's upper left hand, a gesture of Marani affection she had learned to love. "We were supposed to save them," Amy mused. "Turns out they saved us too, taught us patience, showed us that efficiency is not the same as wisdom." Vera's skin shifted through thoughtful purple. "You taught us that action is not the same as recklessness. That urgency has value, we balance each other." That balance was spreading. Mixed species research teams were solving problems neither group could address alone. Trade between GAC worlds was booming. Cultural exchanges were creating art and music and literature that transcended species. Boundaries, children growing up in the coalition did not see aliens, just neighbors who looked different. The Galactic Council convened in emergency session. The agenda was simple: acknowledge the GAC or suppress it. Roth argued for sanctions, isolation, economic pressure to force the coalition to dissolve. Vera presented data showing GAC worlds had higher economic growth than efficiency alliance members. Drell, who had quietly shifted his support to reform, proposed formal recognition. The vote split the council. 12 species supported recognition. 11 opposed, 3 abstained. The motion failed by 1 vote. The GAC members walked out. Within a month, 15 more species had applied to join the coalition. The Galactic Council no longer spoke for the galaxy. 2 philosophies now competed for the future of civilization. One measured success in resources preserved. The other measured success in lives saved. A new distress call arrived from uncharted space. Unknown species, environmental collapse, no council database entry. The Efficiency Alliance followed protocol: observe, document, preserve samples if economically justified. The GAC fleet launched within 48 hours. Humans, Marani, Draylen, Frel, and 20 other species responding together. No debate, no calculation, just ships racing toward strangers who needed help. David Cole sent a message to the unknown species. "We received your call, we are coming, hold on." Pete packed his medical gear, kissed his children goodbye, boarded a ship heading into the unknown. Amy and Vera joined the agricultural response team. Grace led the engineering crews. Robert coordinated logistics. They were not just saving one species anymore. They were building a galaxy where help was always coming, where distress calls received answers, where being civilized meant caring about strangers. The old order would fight this change. The Efficiency Alliance had power, resources, established protocols. But the coalition had something stronger, proof that another way was possible. That compassion could succeed where calculation failed, that the highest civilization was measured not by what it preserved, but by what it shared. On Myra and markets where human and alien cultures blended, children played without caring about species. In hospitals, doctors treated patients without calculating cost versus benefit. In fields, farmers grew food using techniques from 6 different worlds. The distress call had echoed through space 5 years ago. Humanity's response changed the galaxy. But humanity had changed too, learned from the Marani, from every species they helped. Growth was never one-directional. Teachers became students. Saviors became saved. The ships jumped to slip space, carrying help toward another dying world. Behind them, the galaxy slowly, painfully, beautifully learned what it meant to care.